British's institutions. This is a major problem we'll see again and again with colonialism. The institutions that were formed when the empire was originally created gradually stop working as the society changes and the locals acclimated to European standards. As a general life rule, if you see someone doing something that makes absolutely no sense to you, try not to judge them and think, what assumption are they starting with, and are those assumptions actually correct for the world they live in? And you find that that completely changes your perspective on the world. There's a really good book named The Rule of Empires, which goes through a series of imperial conquests ranging from Roman Britain, Arab Spain, to British Kenya, or Spanish Peru. It makes a couple of fascinating points. One detail is that the author always shows an example of a colonizing country being colonized themselves, like the Romans colonizing Britain and the French colonizing Italy, and it shows that everyone gets owned by the wheel of history at some point. However, the thesis of the book is that empires are never made in good faith, which I agree with. If you look at the conqueror's policies, they always benefit the ruling elite and the conquering ethnicity. Even at Rudyard Kipling's time, in the high imperialism of 1900, where there was a lot of rhetoric around the white man's burden and positive colonialism, the usual result of conquest was division of the native people's land and then looting their society. It's normal for the conquered to be excluded from many privileges and rule of their own society treated as second-class citizens inside their own nation. India benefited from the railroads, government, science, law, military, and war that the British gave them. However, the British gave them those institutions since it made India easier to govern. This is clearly showing how the British let 30 million Indians starve without raising a living. Sashi Tharoor's Glorious Empire is a good way of showing how the British navigated the content, and even the things the British did, like irrigating large areas of Pakistan, were done to increase tax revenue. However, that doesn't mean the conquered don't accrue benefits from empire, which they often do to a tremendous amount. A point Dan Carlin made is that once you strip away the positives of empire, which often takes centuries to accrue, which is unity, government, technology, and trade, the great many former empires, such as Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, and Alexander's main accomplishments in life have been the death of colonials. If we throw the baby out with the bathwater, we will move modern science, medicine, technology, democracy, economy, and exchange, human rights, and more out the window. Colonialism is synonymous with colonialism. European societies, except Japan, were completely unwilling to adapt to the modern world without force. The Chinese, Indians, and Muslims only accepted modern science after their empires burned and their failings became completely obvious. These societies would still be medieval today without colonialism as they were just 100 years ago. Africans can be very told about how dependent their societies are upon colonialism, how the institutions they depend upon are based off European forms, how the only trains and roads that work are those who are built by the Europeans, or that the only way they can communicate across their large multi-ethnic nations is through English or French. A complicated point here is that the effects of colonialism aren't just related to colonialism itself. For example, the average African was unaffected by European colonialism during colonialism. Remember, the Europeans only ruled Africa for 60 years, and were normally 0.01% of the population. Thus, the effects of colonialism, such as modern technology, Christianity, a money-based market, or the centralized nation, only reached the normal African decades after colonialism. On a purely numeric basis, colonialism and really modern technology have saved far more lives than the earth. Just as an example, the spread of clean water and anti-malarial medicine, both of which brought by the Europeans, have saved hundreds of millions of lives. This is one of the paradoxes we see in history, especially in war. For example, World War I killed around 15 million people, but penicillin, which was developed as a side effect of World War I, saved hundreds of millions of lives. These are completely dependent upon Europe's influence on the world, given all of the interventions occurred in Europe and its diaspora. One of the other points of the book The Rule of Empires is that the pain of colonialism has much more to do with the power relationships in each colonial country rather than the morality of the people involved. When the British colonized India, they were so outnumbered, around 1,000-1, they needed to work with the local Indians very closely to control India. When the Spanish colonized Peru, they were terrible, killing off the entire ruling class, enslaving the native population, treating them terribly. However, they were able to do that since the technological and social difference between them was large enough that they could get away with it. The British men in India weren't more moral than the Spanish in Peru, at least by a big margin. Rather, they weren't in a situation where they could get away with being as brutal. You know this is the case because you'll see this across the same empires in the same time period. The Spanish were cruel to the Peruvians since they could, but the Spanish Empire was very kind to Belgium. Since Belgium was a colony that was surrounded on all sides by opponents who could seize it, while also being very wealthy, so the Spanish couldn't afford to lose Belgium. Freedom is a market value where, due to a combination of technology, numbers, unified society, military ability, and geography, certain areas can demand much better treatment than others. For this reason, differing regions got very different results from European colonialism, often by the same countries due to having very different circumstances. What we're seeing with colonialism was Europe, for a series of reasons I tackled in this video, had a staggering superiority in technology and society. The European governments didn't plan it, but enterprising groups of Europeans colonized the world. The question is, did this have to happen? And I'd say yes. There are societies that wouldn't have pushed to colonize everything they could, like the Chinese turning inwards in the 1400s, but they also didn't invent anything after that same time. However, the Europeans of our world, who created the modern world, pushing technology forward and more, would have always done it. As Oswald Spengler said, the European spirit that drove to colonize the world was the same that also developed modern science, which saved millions of lives or created Mozart. They're two sides of the same coin. Modernity is colonialism. For an example of the logic of force and practicality that went together with colonialism, look at the colonization of Africa at the end of the 19th century. Europeans hadn't been able to penetrate the African interior, given the local diseases were so terrible. However, with the invention of modern medicine, steamships, and the railroad, the Europeans carved up Africa in a matter of a decade. I've done a lot of research on this topic, which I've covered in this video, and the short answer for why the Europeans did this was that they just could, and the technological difference made it incredibly easy. Less than 5,000 Europeans died in the scramble for Africa. For a reference, that's about 30 seconds of the Battle of the Somme. In the 1960s, the Europeans gave up their African colonies peacefully. The reason was that the Europeans no longer had growing populations that made the colonies make sense, and on top of that, the African colonies weren't profitable. We forget this today, but Europe was losing large amounts of money holding on to Africa, which was lightly populated and poor. In 1900, less than 1% of the British stock market or economy was involved in Africa. The entire British Empire was only 15% of the British stock market and foreign trade and economy, most of which was white colonies like Canada or Australia, followed by India. Colonialism happened not because it was super profitable, but simply because the Europeans could do it. As a final point, people like to say that Europe in the Industrial Revolution and modernity stemmed from colonialism, and there is literally no evidence for this and lots of evidence contrary to it. Europe was already the wealthiest and most technologically advanced place in the world by a significant margin at the end of the Middle Ages, and after colonialism, Europe's economies took off while those of the colonies collapsed, which signified that colonialism was an economic
Tell him what he did as the masses scream the lyrics
drain to Europe, but a boon to the colonies. There's also no correlation you can run between colonies and wealth. Places with very large colonies, such as Spain or Portugal, would often fall behind economically. And from everything we see, colonialism was a representation of Europe's advancement and technological and economic superiority, rather than being an effect of it. The negatives of European colonialism are common across empires in every society, but at the same time, there is no parallel to the better aspects of European colonialism.
But if these guys
Europe giving up its colonies peacefully has no parallel in history. It's sad that the Europeans can't be proud or the Africans grateful for doing something that is insanely generous by history's standards. Although the Europeans were deeply brutal, there is no parallel over history to their generosity with their subjects. There's a book named The Barbarous Years about the British colonization of Eastern North America in the 1600s. There's an interesting anecdote that Jamestown, the first British colony in America, was run by a man who was sympathetic to the Indians. He signed a peace treaty with them and tried to do goodwill with them. The natives just used this as cover to launch an attack on Jamestown, which killed him. When we backseat drive at history, we forget what it was actually like at the time. The reason people don't trust other groups is because stuff like that's normal. Liking each other and goodwill is strange. However, this story from Jamestown is demonstrative of this European humanitarian impulse that you saw for all of colonialism, which is absent from other cultures. It goes back to the Spanish colonization of the Caribbean, which Bartolomeu de las Casas wrote letters reprimanding the enslavement of the native tribes. The Spanish crown then went to great effort to protect the natives.
Oh fuck yeah, Austria joined. People states joined.
The population from the conquistadors. One of my favorite eras of history is colonial America, and there's a very clear streak among the British settlers of caring about the natives, and often genuinely liked them, even as they fought them. There is no parallel to this in other world cultures. The West's humanitarianism is not normal, and we forget that the rest of the world's never gotten on board. The Russians are invading Ukraine now. Turks are actively building a new empire while oppressing the Kurds. India is oppressing its Muslims in Kashmir, while most societies in Southeast Asia are committing genocide. China is also committing genocide, colonizing ethnic regions, and turning itself into an Orwellian state. The humanitarian streak grew in the West as it became wealthier. There's an interesting book called Freedom, which talks about the settlement of both America and New Zealand. The wars against the natives were much bloodier in the U.S. when the settlement of New Zealand was peaceful. This is since the Enlightenment changed the worldview from natives being heathens without souls to being part of the universal brotherhood of man. As I've said before, the West isn't special for practicing slavery. Most societies have. It is for abolishing it. The West was the only society that felt guilty for its actions and changed, which is something we forget today. We're confused in that we think the world just magically became moral. The moral arc of history doesn't exist. We make it happen. In the 20th century, the Nazis and Soviets practiced the largest slavery and mass death ever. Social justice is trying to drag us back to witch burnings and medieval senses of heresy and clear of good versus evil. In John Winter's book, where he traveled around 1950s Africa, and he was famous, so he was able to interview all the most important figures in every society. And you would ask these British officials, you put a lot of effort into educating the native peoples, but the second they become educated, they suddenly become nationalists and start lobbying for independence. And the British officials will say, we do it because it's the right thing to do, and whether or not they become nationalists is their private choice as individuals. And that kind of sense doesn't exist in any other societies, and we need to give the British credit for that. In any other society in history, Gandhi's attempt to shame the British through peaceful non-resistance would have just resulted in him getting hanged by the British government. The fact that that didn't happen suggests a morally much more advanced regime than almost anything else in history. The West did something genuinely great in changing itself for the better and becoming humanitarian. But as other eras of history would have immediately told us, kindness doesn't get you much love in international politics. Countries don't praise the West for this, since they're our rivals, and they won't love us no matter what we do. That's not how international relations work. Iran and China will always call us the great Satan, no matter how nice we are. The descendants of the people who freed the slaves and peacefully liberated the colonies.
So we're gonna send this Marine Army down here.
Shit on them for not going far enough. Well, they did some of those generous acts in history. Kindness turned to weakness in the West. The language of politics is and will always be power and force, no matter how much we don't want to believe that. We have forgotten that strength is the language of politics. I'll send you all a collect.
March to Adiran.
When he came to the band,
and we'll take the mercenaries to Adiran. First we'll recover our morale in Spoleto.
Give hug at the end of this video, since I think y'all need it. To circle back to the main question of this video, was colonialism good or bad?
Over there, behind this fort.
The short answer is that's not the right metric. Nietzsche talks about how the ancient Greeks had a concept of greatness and weakness that we don't really have today. And with our Abrahamic worldview, we try to shove everything into good or evil. But in the world of politics and power, that's not how things work. In the worldview that the ancient Greeks had, colonialism was clearly great. The Europeans ruled the world for centuries, and their ability to pull that off is absolutely astounding. People will be talking about it for thousands of years from now. However, was it good or bad? And I can't give an answer to that, because millions of people were brutally killed, tortured, and so many worse things by European colonizers. At the same time, the Europeans brought many different innovations and were consistently more humane than their competitors. When all's said and done, I don't think whether or not colonialism was good or evil is a useful metric. Because by the standards of individuals, nations always act like sociopaths.
That would never stop till Juanita's found. A man and his rifle, a mule and his hound.
Alright guys, let's skip another video. And pop in on chat, see what people got going on. You wanna watch a, would you guys wanna watch a eu4 video, or eu5? We can put one of those on if we want. We'll put on an eu5 video, I think. I wanna find a one. So I saw one last night, banking country. I saw a video in the suggested tab down here. I do wanna find that though. Let's see. Where is this?
One day I believe that we'll be carried away by pretty horses. And the night will open wide. We'll stretch our arms and float out in.
Hello and welcome back. Today we are continuing our Venice run with the intention of forming Carthage, so it's a Venice/Carthage run. Last episode was our opening steps.
In our love, we find forgiveness, and in our fear, we learn to see. And in my chains, I saw us running.
Ever stared at your bank account and seen that magical 6-figure number staring back at you for the first time? Congratulations. You've officially joined a club that most people never reach. But here's the thing that nobody tells you about hitting $100,000. Having the money is actually the easy part. Knowing what to do with it without completely screwing up your financial future is where things get interesting. You've probably spent years grinding, saving every dollar you could, maybe eating more ramen noodles than any human should consume, all to reach this milestone. And now that you're here, you're faced with a problem that sounds ridiculous to anyone still living paycheck to paycheck. What do you do when you actually have money to invest? The internet is full of advice ranging from brilliant to completely insane. Like some guy on social media will tell you to put it all in cryptocurrency, your neighbor thinks you should buy rental properties, and your financial advisor is probably pushing some expensive mutual fund that makes them rich while keeping you average. My name is Nick, and I help people understand.
This life change comes slowly. There is time
I love that I can make this video. I like to imagine that only at this specific moment in history, with someone of my social type, could you make a video at the anthropology and philosophy of real-life NPCs. The digital world allows the blurring of lines between what's a shitpost and what's an actual statement. Hell, that's the entire internet historian's career. This is not a video about NPCs in video games, or how they were created. This is not a video game channel, and I don't particularly care if some Japanese studio in the 90s invented them or not. This is a video about the NPC